Marcus had been serving coffee for 3 years, and he'd learned one thing. Customers always assumed the waiter was invisible. Tonight, that assumption would either save his life or end it. The Riverside Cafe wasn't much to look at from the outside. Squeezed between a pawn shop and a dry cleaner on the less fashionable side of downtown Portland, it attracted the kind of customers who valued anonymity over ambiance. Marcus Chen had been working the evening shift there since graduating college, telling himself it was temporary while he figured out what to do with his sociology degree. At 25, Marcus had perfected the art of being unremarkable. Average height, dark hair that perpetually needed a trim, and a habit of moving quietly between tables like a shadow. Regular customers barely acknowledged him beyond pointing at their empty cups or mumbling their orders. He'd become furniture in their world, functional, but forgettable. That Tuesday evening in October started like any other. The dinner crowd had thinned to the usual suspects. Sarah, the nurse who came in after her shift to decompress with chamomile tea. Old Pete, who nursed a single black coffee for hours while working crossword puzzles, and the college students, who turned the back corner into their study hall. Marcus was wiping down table 6 when the three men walked in at 8:47 p.m. He noticed them immediately, not because they were particularly memorable, but because they weren't his usual clientele. Their clothes were too expensive for the neighborhood, their shoes too clean for people who walked these streets regularly. The first man was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 40, with graying temples and the kind of confident stride that suggested he was used to being in charge. The second was younger, nervous energy radiating from his thin frame as his eyes darted around the cafe. The third was forgettable by design. Medium build, brown hair, the kind of face you'd struggle to describe to police. They chose table 7 in the far corner, the one Marcus privately called the conspiracy booth because it was tucked away from the main flow of the cafe, partially hidden by a decorative pillar. "Evening, gentlemen," Marcus said, approaching with menus. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The older man looked through him, as if he were made of glass. "3 coffees, black, and we don't want to be disturbed." Marcus nodded and retreated, filing away the man's tone. Rude customers weren't unusual, but there was something different about this group. They waited until he'd moved away before speaking, and even then their voices were barely above a whisper. As he prepared their coffee, Marcus found himself straining to catch fragments of their conversation. He'd developed excellent peripheral vision during his time at the cafe. It helped him anticipate when customers needed refills or checks. But tonight, that skill was picking up words that made his hands pause over the coffee pot. "Judge Patterson? Tomorrow morning? No witnesses?" Marcus carried the coffee to table 7, moving with deliberate slowness. The men stopped talking as he approached, watching him with the intensity of predators assessing a potential threat. He set down their cups with steady hands, despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "Anything else?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Privacy," the older man said flatly. Marcus nodded and retreated to the counter, but something in their demeanor had triggered every warning bell in his mind. Judge Patterson. He knew that name. Patricia Patterson was the federal judge presiding over the Morrison crime family trial that had been front-page news for weeks. The trial that was supposed to reach a verdict soon. He busied himself cleaning the espresso machine, a task that positioned him within earshot of table 7 while appearing completely absorbed in his work. The men had resumed their conversation, apparently confident that the invisible waiter posed no threat. "Patterson leaves her house at 7:15 every morning," the nervous one was saying. "Same route to the courthouse. Jefferson Street to 5th, then—" "Keep your voice down," the older man snapped. Anyone could be listening. But they continued, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as the details emerged. Judge Patterson. Tomorrow morning. A car bomb that would look like an accident. The Morrison family had clearly decided that intimidation wasn't enough. They were going to eliminate the judge entirely. Marcus's sociology background had included criminology courses. He knew the Morrison family by reputation. Organized crime that had evolved from street-level operations to sophisticated corruption reaching into city government. If they were planning to assassinate a federal judge, they had resources and connections that made them incredibly dangerous. His first instinct was to reach for his phone, to dial 911 and let the professionals handle it. But as his hand moved toward his pocket, the nervous man at table 7 looked directly at him. "You sure about the waiter?" the man asked, not taking his eyes off Marcus. Marcus forced himself to continue cleaning the machine, scrubbing the same spot repeatedly while his heart hammered against his ribs. In his peripheral vision, he could see all three men now studying him.
"He's nobody," the older man said dismissively. "Been working here for years. Probably doesn't speak English as his first language anyway." The casual racism stung, but Marcus was grateful for their assumption. His family had immigrated from Taiwan when he was 3, but his English was flawless, a fact that might save Judge Patterson's life. Still, the third man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a soft menace. "We should be careful. Loose ends have a way of becoming problems." What followed was the most terrifying 45 minutes of Marcus's life. He had to continue serving other customers, cleaning tables, taking orders, all while maintaining the facade of the oblivious immigrant worker they believed him to be. Every movement was calculated to appear natural while he strained to catch more details of their plan. The bomb was already in place, attached to Judge Patterson's car in the courthouse parking garage. The timer was set for 7:30 a.m., just as she would be arriving for court. The explosion would be attributed to a gas leak or mechanical failure. The Morrison family had contacts in the fire department who would help shape the narrative. Marcus needed to call the police, but his phone was in his jacket, hanging in the employee break room. And with 3 sets of eyes tracking his every movement, even the smallest deviation from his normal routine could be fatal. He watched the clock above the register tick toward 9:30. The cafe would close at 10, and these men showed no signs of leaving. Sarah the nurse had gone home. The college students were packing up their books. Old Pete was counting out exact change for his coffee. As Pete left, Marcus realized with growing horror that soon he would be alone with the 3 men. No witnesses, no protection, just him and the knowledge that could destroy them. The older man's phone buzzed. He answered with a curt, "Yeah," then listened intently. "No changes," he said finally. "Patterson dies tomorrow. The family's future depends on it." When he hung up, the nervous man asked, "What about afterward?" "Investigations. Federal marshals will tear apart her life, looking for the bomber," the older man replied. "They'll check her cases, her enemies, maybe even look at the Morrison trial. But they won't find anything pointing to us. The device is untraceable, the timing looks random, and we'll all have perfect alibis." Marcus felt sick. They'd thought of everything. Judge Patterson would die, the Morrison trial would end in a mistrial, and these men would walk away clean, unless someone warned her. At 9:45, with 15 minutes until closing, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't wait any longer. "Gentlemen," he called out, doing his best impression of someone whose English was heavily accented. "Cafe closing soon. Last coffee." They waved him off, dismissively. Perfect. Marcus walked toward the break room, moving with the same unremarkable pace he'd maintained all evening. But instead of getting his jacket, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Marcus Chen at Riverside Cafe on Morrison Street," he whispered rapidly. "There are 3 men here planning to assassinate federal judge Patricia Patterson tomorrow morning with a car bomb. They said it's attached to her car in the courthouse parking garage, set to explode at 7:30 a.m. "Sir, can you repeat that?" Are you in immediate danger? Yes, they're still here. They don't know I understand English. You need to evacuate Judge Patterson and check her car immediately. Stay on the line, sir. Units are en route to your location. Marcus's blood froze. No, don't send anyone here yet. If they see police cars, they'll know I called. Wait until they leave, then... The break room door opened. Marcus spun around to find the forgettable man standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the phone in Marcus's hand. For a moment, neither moved. Then, the man's hand slowly reached inside his jacket. "Who did you call?" the man asked quietly. Marcus's mind raced. The phone was still connected to 911. If he could keep talking, they might pick up enough to understand the situation. My girlfriend," Marcus stammered, letting his accent thicken. "Tell her I work late tonight." The man stepped closer. "Hang up the phone." "Jennifer?" Marcus said loudly into the phone, praying the 911 operator would understand. "3 men still here at Riverside Cafe on Morrison Street. Very dangerous. Need help." The man lunged forward, but Marcus was already moving. He threw the phone toward the corner and dove in the opposite direction, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Help! Police! Bomb!" What happened next was chaos. The man caught Marcus's shoulder and spun him around, but Marcus had adrenaline and desperation on his side. He drove his knee upward, connecting with something soft, and the man doubled over with a grunt. Marcus burst through the break room door into the main cafe area, where the other 2 men were already on their feet. The older man had a gun in his hand. "He called the cops!" the forgettable man shouted from behind Marcus. The cafe's front door was 20 feet away. Marcus had a split second to decide: run for the exit and hope to escape, or try to delay them until help arrived. He chose delay. Marcus grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it at the older man, spoiling his aim as the gun went off. The bullet shattered the front window in an explosion of glass. Then Marcus was behind the counter, using the espresso machine as cover while he searched frantically for a weapon. His hand closed around the coffee pot, still half full of scalding liquid. As the nervous man came around the counter, Marcus swung it in a wide arc, sending boiling coffee across the man's face and chest. The scream that followed would haunt Marcus's dreams for months. But the older man still had his gun, and now he was moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Marcus was trapped behind the counter with nowhere to run. "Should have minded your own business," the man said, raising his weapon. The front door exploded inward in a shower of remaining glass as armed officers flooded the cafe. "FBI, drop your weapons." The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. The older man, later identified as Vincent "Vinny" Romano, a lieutenant in the Morrison crime family, chose to shoot it out rather than surrender. He died behind Table 7, the conspiracy booth that had hosted his final plan. The nervous man, Tony Breslin, survived his coffee burns and was arrested along with the forgettable man, whose name turned out to be David Cale. Both would eventually testify against the Morrison family in exchange for reduced sentences. Judge Patterson's car was indeed wired to explode. The bomb squad found it exactly where the men had said it would be, attached to her vehicle's undercarriage with enough explosive to level half the parking garage. She had been scheduled to arrive at the courthouse at exactly 7:30 a.m. Marcus spent the next 6 hours in federal custody, going over every detail of the conversation he'd overheard. FBI agent Sarah Martinez, who led the task force investigating the Morrison family, called him a hero. Marcus didn't feel like one. He felt exhausted, traumatized, and oddly empty. Your quick thinking saved not just Judge Patterson's life, Agent Martinez told him as they finished the debriefing. This bombing would have given the Morrison family another 5 years to operate while we rebuilt our case. Dozens of people are alive tonight because you had the courage to act. The trial resumed a week later with heightened security. Judge Patterson, shaken but determined, sentenced Morrison family boss Anthony "Big Tony" Morrison to life in prison without parole. The organization crumbled within months as subordinates scrambled to cut deals with federal prosecutors. Marcus's story made national news for exactly 1 day before being overshadowed by a celebrity divorce. He was offered book deals, movie rights, and interview opportunities. He turned them all down. 3 months later, Marcus was still working at Riverside Cafe. The owner, Mrs. Kim, had offered to make him manager after all the publicity, but he'd declined. He liked the simplicity of his old job, even if he could never again pretend that customers didn't see him. The cafe had been repaired and expanded, partly funded by an anonymous donation that everyone suspected came from Judge Patterson. The conspiracy booth had been removed entirely, replaced by an open seating area with better sightlines. Marcus had developed new habits. He paid attention to conversations differently now, not out of nosiness, but from a hard-earned understanding that information could be life or death. He'd also started taking self-defense classes and carrying a small can of pepper spray, legally carried after Agent Martinez helped him get a concealed weapons permit. On a Tuesday evening in January, almost exactly 3 months after the incident, a man in an expensive suit walked into the cafe. Marcus felt his pulse quicken until he recognized the face. Judge Patterson's husband, Dr. Robert Patterson. "You're Marcus," the man said, approaching the counter. "Yes, sir." "I wanted to thank you personally. Patricia would have come herself, but security protocols." He trailed off, then extended his hand. "You saved my wife's life. I don't know how to repay that debt." Marcus shook his hand. "No debt, sir. I just did what anyone would do." Dr. Patterson smiled sadly. "No, Marcus. You did what almost no one would do. You chose to get involved when it would have been safer to look the other way." After he left, Marcus found himself thinking about visibility and invisibility. For 3 years, he'd been content to blend into the background, to be overlooked and underestimated. It had felt safe, anonymous, uncomplicated, but safety, he'd learned, was often an illusion, and sometimes being seen, really seen, was exactly what the world needed. A young woman entered the cafe, talking loudly on her phone about meeting someone later. Marcus served her coffee and minded his own business. But when she hung up and a man in dark glasses immediately called someone to report her location, Marcus found himself paying very careful attention indeed. Some lessons once learned changed you forever. As he watched the man in dark glasses, Marcus realized that being invisible wasn't his superpower anymore. His superpower was knowing when to stop being invisible. And judging by the way the man was now following the young woman outside, that time was right now. Marcus reached for his phone, but this time he wasn't afraid. He'd learned something important that night 3 months ago. Heroes weren't people without fear. They were people who acted despite their fear. The call connected on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? Marcus looked out the window at the woman walking alone down the dark street, unaware of the danger following her. Then he looked at himself in the reflection, no longer invisible, no longer hiding. "This is Marcus Chen," he said clearly, "and I think someone is about to be hurt." Outside, the man in dark glasses quickened his pace. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Some habits, he'd discovered, were worth keeping.